Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, are UK health professionals being turned into government informants? We look at why National Health Service employees are training to identify potential terrorists. Filling in for Malika Bilal, who's our usual digital producer, is our guest digital producer, Omar Bidar. So the community always very opinionated.
Very opinionated on this for sure.
Were they falling on this conversation?
Although in this particular issue, even though we're getting different opinions on this, it is largely critical of this program that would essentially enlist health professionals to help in counterterrorism efforts.
Okay.
We have a couple of tweets here if you take a look at my screen. Stephen says, there are too many things that could potentially go wrong. This PREVENT program is a disaster waiting to happen. And then we have TV Miller here, who kind of imagines what an interaction with a doctor who's active in this program might go like. And he says, quote, "Sir, your lump is benign, but say, do you know how to wire a Casio to a bomb by any chance?" We certainly hope this is not how that program would essentially work. But of course, for those of you at home, we want you to be part of this conversation. So be sure to tweet in using the hashtag AJStream so we can get your online engagement during the show.
And before we get started, here are a few of the hashtags the stream is following. When you think of counter-terrorism, so when you think of counter-terrorism initiatives, what do you picture? Undercover agents, special operations, surveillance maybe? Well, how about doctors and nurses? The PREVENT strategy is part of the UK's larger counter-terrorism programme. It's training National Health Service employees to identify potential terrorists and report them to authorities. They're looking for signs like identity crisis, unemployment, rejection of UK foreign policy and mistrust of Western media. Authorities argue that because NHS workers have contact with more than 300,000 patients every day, they're key players in identifying those vulnerable to radicalisation. But critics say this move is turning health workers into government informants. So is this about making counter-terrorism a collective effort or turning civil servants into state agents? To help us talk about this, we're joined by Dr. Adnan Siddiqui. He's a general practitioner with the National Health Service and also director of CAGE, that's an advocacy organisation working to empower Muslim communities. Sue Southern is from the West Midlands Police Force. She's the head of their counter-terrorism unit and formerly the head of the PREVENT programme there. Imran Awan is a criminologist with the Birmingham City University and author of Extremism, Counter-Terrorism and Policing. And Jahan Mahmood is an historian and former advisor to the Home Office and Office for Security and Counter-Terrorism. So it's great to have you all here in the stream. So let me start with you. What is it about healthcare workers, doctors, nurses perhaps, that makes them very helpful for the sort of outreach that you need to do with the community right now in the UK?
Yeah, I guess first it's worth stressing that they are only one sector that we work with. So we work with schools, education, local authorities, probation service. So they are just another sector. We have a number of examples of individuals that have some kind of mental health psychosis that may present to health professionals. And I can quote a case study where we had a young man that had paranoid schizophrenia. He converted to Islam in prison, started to take an interest in Afghanistan, and then was reported to be claiming to want to martyr himself, carry out a suicide bombing. And actually at the heart of all that, the issues for him were drug misuse, a lack of family support, no proper real care around his medication. And we worked as part of the Channel programme, which is a multi-agency programme of partners to deal with this kind of risk, to actually stabilise this man. So whilst that referral came into the counter-terrorism unit, it actually was an issue for PREVENT and for multi-agency partners. We stabilised him, and actually we then understood that he didn't pose a risk at all. So, that is the kind of referral that we are kind of looking for from health professionals.
Right, Sue, so when you say referral, so did his doctor come to you? How does that actually work out?
Yeah, in fact, in this particular case, it was his neighbours that came to and made that referral. But then what we had as part of the Channel programme was the cooperation and involvement of his GP, the psychiatric team that had been treating him, in order to put that wraparound support in and ensure that that ongoing treatment and therapy could take place.
All right, let me bring a doctor into the conversation here. Dr. Siddiqui, you're volunteering to be part of the PREVENT programme. What are you volunteering to do exactly?
I mean, I think that the actual initiative of PREVENT, I want to know that are we actually going to be helping in the counter-terrorism effort or not? I've asked the police on many occasions. I used to go to Scotland Yard since 2003 regularly, that they would always talk about radicalisation and signs of radicalisation. And my view very simply is that as a clinician, I'd want to know that what are the signs of radicalisation, which would then allow us to know that this person is at risk or not. I mean, I'm very worried by what Sue said there, because the actual example she mentioned, it was actually, you can see how this is permeated into society. It was a neighbour who brought this up. It wasn't a clinician. The guy has paranoid schizophrenia, and I hear all kinds of delusional things from patients, and I think that, you know, to let the neighbours, you know, carry on with this kind of, if you suspect it, report it, it puts a patient at risk.
Sue, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think the point there, though, is genuine concern, identifying vulnerability. And it's not just the vulnerability for the individual, but then it is the vulnerability that if that individual was then to be used by others that wanted to radicalise him and use him in a way in which he could martyr himself, then that's the danger. So actually what we demonstrate there is a proportionate response that's multi-agency, that's not jumping to a conclusion that this individual needs to be arrested, but actually looking at the totality of the issues and then working as partners to put a support mechanism in place. And that's what PREVENT's about. It's about preventing people from becoming terrorists, identifying vulnerability, challenging ideology, and working with institutions and organisations, and the health professionals are one of those institutions, organisations that we work with.
Omar.
So, Fahmi, we have a lot of people who are essentially expressing concern about what this could could cause in the relationship between a person and their doctor. We have Yahya here on Twitter who says, knowing that you are considered a potential terrorist even by workers of the noblest profession has a big impact on your mind. And Dewey here says, hospitals must only report if unusual things happen, not specifically detecting terrorists. This will cause public discomforts. So, Dr. Adnan, is that one of the concerns? Have you interacted with people who have essentially expressed that they might be more reluctant to be more open and straightforward with their doctors because of programs like this?
Well, I think that this goes to the heart of what we know as doctors, is that the patient-doctor relationship is of confidentiality. And I do understand that, you know, we all as part of medicine have to do safeguarding. So when we're dealing with potential child abuse or things like that, there are times that we have to breach that. But the problem with this program is that there's no hard evidence. What Sue's mentioned here is you're talking about pre-crime, potential terrorism. You know, we don't deal with these types of things. Is that, you know, if we're talking about children who are at risk of abuse, we're talking about things which have got an evidence base and that we know that this is potentially happening. You've got bruises, you've got non-accidental injury. But what you're hearing now, and she mentioned it, you know, in her conversation just now, is that you're trying to challenge ideology. It is not the job of doctors or any healthcare professional to look at the ideological health of any patient.
So let me just bring in Jahan here. Jahan, you used to work with the government on their counter-terrorism various programs. What did you make of hearing that healthcare professionals were also being added to the mix?
I think it's a concern. I think the response is not in proportion to the threat as well. I think we're creating an environment of suspicion and fear. The real concern doesn't really come from within the institutions. It comes from sometimes young people who have quite weird and wonderful ideas, and you know, sometimes those weird and wonderful ideas doesn't mean that there's actually an issue. There's a lot of young men I've met, for instance, who've got some weird interpretation. It doesn't actually mean that they're a threat. The concern is,
Jahan, what do you mean by weird and wonderful ideas? How might that be misinterpreted?
For instance, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, for instance, they can say, well, look, we believe there is a legitimate right for us to take up action against what our government is doing abroad. But I have never met anyone who has ever said that they want to take out an installation on British soil. The concern normally is that they want to go abroad. But if they have a weird and wonderful obsession or interpretation, like the one that I've just mentioned, it's about talking to them. It's about creating an environment where people feel that they can share those conversations. With where we're actually headed, the chances of that are very slim. You want to be able to share a conversation, and then someone can come in who's more responsible and understanding and challenge and counter that. With what we're currently doing is that we're creating, we're pushing people further away. The conversation's going further away. And what's the chances that someone is going to end up having a conversation like that with a nurse or a doctor? Well, I'm actually now thinking of going abroad there, doctor. I'm going to buy a Kalashnikov when I get to Pakistan. I'm going to go on the front. I mean, we've got to be very, very careful on how we tackle this. And ideology is not the main issue here. The main grievance is, and always has been, foreign policy, racism, and often a lack of Islamic understanding. But we're not dealing with those issues. We keep focusing on ideology.
So Sue, that's quite a big pushback that you're getting there from people who are working within certain communities that you're interested in engaging with as a police force. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree actually with some of what Johanna said. We are, one of the things we are discussing here in Birmingham is about, through the joint partnership work with local authorities and communities, how do we create a safe space for debate so that young people can debate issues and actually do that with people that are responsible, who can listen to those concerns, as opposed to what we see now is young people going on the internet and having those debates in chat rooms. And actually that's more potentially more dangerous, because there is evidence of online radicalisation and individuals that will enter those chat rooms with a view to delivering a narrative that is quite worrying. So that is something that we want to do with the communities of Birmingham.
Sure. Omar, go ahead.
So we also have a lot of people actually who are weighing in online right now who are concerned about the specific signs that are being identified as essentially leading to someone being suspected of being involved in terrorism. Nina here on Facebook says, wow, health professionals should report identity crisis, unemployment, rejection of UK foreign policy, and mistrust of Western media. Well, I'm not sure this just means what they mean by identity crisis, but the rest of those other things are just normal. And we have Jacqueline here who says, rejection of UK foreign policy and mistrust of Western media must mean that 80% of the people with more than half a brain in the West are now regarded as potential terrorists. So Imran, to bring you into this conversation, are you concerned that this might create a chilling effect on dissent and disagreement with UK policy?
Yeah, I do. And I think, unfortunately, when we look at the counterterrorism narrative and the strategy, it seems to be very woolly from the start in terms of its definition. There's a lot about shared British values, but we don't really know what is or how we define shared British values. And I think the vast majority of people who may have a mental illness will not be terrorists. Let's make that very clear. And so I agree with Adnan's point that unfortunately what will happen is it breaks rules of confidentiality and can have a chilling effect on people's freedom. Young people should be open, whether it's young Muslims or not, should be free to sort of be radical and to have dissent against whether it's foreign policy or counterterrorism policies or legislation. But the fact that something like that might be a sign or an indicator towards a pathway of radicalization is problematic.
So I want to make sure that people are very clear about the training that healthcare professionals are going to get in the UK. It is mandatory. So can you take us through the training? Because people are making assumptions based on part of things that they've read and may not have even been through the training themselves. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I think the point has already been made about it's about safeguarding. So if we look at safeguarding around child sexual exploitation, then this is no different. It's about so we raise awareness around the Prevent programme. There are case studies.
Are people sitting around discussing this? I mean, what is the actual training? Take us through
absolutely.
that.
So the training consists of sort of video classroom-based case studies that look at the two types of ideology. So we give a case study of an individual that has an AQ-inspired ideology, an Al-Qaeda-inspired ideology, and someone who has an extreme right-wing inspired ideology. And then so it takes them through the case studies and asks them questions to consider the behaviour, the signs and symptoms that people are demonstrating, and what they would do as professionals given those set of circumstances. It talks to them about the channel program, which actually has 22 vulnerability factors that form part of that assessment. So this isn't 4 or 5 factors. The actual it looks at engagement, it looks at intent, it looks at capability. So we're looking at a huge amount of factors. And I think the point is right. We are operating in that pre-criminal space because we don't want that escalation into something that takes someone to a point where they want to attack plan. So it's very practical, it's very hands-on, it's delivered by health professionals to health professionals, and the referral process, very similar to that in terms of child safeguarding, is done and managed very carefully. And there are a number of pathways of reassessment and risk assessment that take place before a referral would come across.
You can see though, if you're trained to be a doctor or a nurse or somebody who works in a hospital, how this might be a little uncomfortable for people. How do you address that discomfort? For them feeling, well, this isn't my job. Why am I doing this?
Yeah, I guess come back to that point. If we look at safeguarding in totality, the discussion that takes place is about safeguarding individuals that may be vulnerable to radicalisation.
Right, so I hear that, Sue, sorry to interrupt you. I hear that, but let me play you something, and then that might actually maybe put my point a little better. Al-Jazeera spoke earlier on this month to a nurse who has undergone the training. Listen to her concerns and then we'll come back to the conversation. Have a listen to this.
As part of the training, we were told to look out for specific characteristics of someone who might be vulnerable to radicalisation. The healthcare worker's job is to ultimately treat your patient. It doesn't matter what they walk in the door with. You as a healthcare professional within whichever speciality you work, you've been trained to help support them. I don't understand why the counter-terrorism unit is actually offering training to healthcare professionals to spot terrorists, because that's not even part of our remit, it's not part of our job description, it's actually something that the police should be doing. So offering this training, it's almost as if we're becoming government informants.
So this nurse was in disguise, and she's saying, Sue, I think it should be your job, Sue, not my job. How do you respond to that? Just very briefly, and then we'll head back to the community.
Yeah, the police have been doing some of this prevent training with institutions. The decision was made at government level that actually it's better that a health professional delivers that to health professionals so they can deal firsthand with some of the concerns that the nurse raises. My staff aren't in a position to understand or appreciate some of those concerns, so it's better that that professional delivers it to those professionals.
Right. Omar.
We actually have a medical professional who raised that specific concern that you just raised. Amun just tweeted in saying, identifying potential terrorists is crossing the border of neutrality that we swear by when we start our exercise. On the other hand, Paladin here says that all citizens should be trained to report suspicious persons and activities. Why should the NHS personnel be any different? So Jahan, I want to throw that in your direction. Are we making a bigger deal about this than we should? I mean, what's wrong with being vigilant in an age where essentially we do have a security risk? What's wrong with having doctors like everybody else being vigilant for signs?
See, it has to be proportionate to start off with. That's very important. On top of it, 1 day's training is somehow going to make you an expert on understanding this phenomena, that it's remarkably complex. So we trained them for a day and we just let them out. I mean, I've been trying to understand this phenomena and complexity. I'll never ever label myself as an extremist because it is a humbling topic in itself and a discipline in itself. There are so many disciplines that are involved, of course. And I just think it's remarkably silly to be able to think that in 1 day's training you're going to somehow be able to train individuals who have no background in this issue, who have no understanding of the dynamics probably of the city that they're working in, the demographics, the sensitivities, the semantics on how to talk to people about these issues. I think we have to be very, very careful. And I've actually been involved with the government in trying to talk to them on how they improve community engagement. And to be honest with you, I feel that often we lose at the very first step, which is semantics. How do we win over the hearts and minds of the Muslim community and the wider community? And we've not been able to do that and prevent, on the whole, certainly in the Birmingham context, as soon as you mention it, people just close down. They don't want to talk to you. So, it's easier said than done. I definitely believe that safeguarding is very important. The whole purpose of me getting involved in this topic is that I wanted to safeguard young men because I work with young men who were on the periphery of crime. I don't want to see a young man become a criminal statistic and throw his life away. So on that regard, I do think it's important.
Right.
But let's get this into context.
All right, so I'm going to show you a website. This is the West Midlands Police website. I'm going to scroll down here. Not quite as exciting as we get down to the print, but this is a really good point I have to make here. Going down to the counter-terrorism success stories, we have Operation Pittsford, Operation Alva, Norbury, Ranmore, Spherical, Gamble, all where, Sue, where your unit was very successful in foiling basically terrorist plots. So it's a real threat that's literally under your very noses in Birmingham, in the West Midlands, around the United Kingdom. So I want to throw this out to the other guests here who are criticising what you're trying to do and asking you, Doctor, for instance, what would you do? These are very real things that are happening right now in the UK in terms of security threats.
Yeah, I understand that, and I think that what's quite important is that we've already had discussions recently to say that the prisoner population of the UK, the Muslim population is going up astronomically. And I think the dilemma you've got is that people are being locked up and being caught up in these kind of operations because they are what we described before as pre-criminals. They're being actually imprisoned for what they might do rather than what they will do. So they're what we call the aspirational rather than the operational criminals.
So Doctor,
Now, if you did
I understand that,
then-
and we have had that conversation on the stream, and it was a very lively conversation. But let's get back to the real issue here that we're talking about today, is that if you're not utilising everybody, all your civil servants, all the expertise that you have, how else do you help get the community to be engaged with fighting security issues?
No, I mean, I think that, Femi, it's an important point you mentioned, that, but, it's not our job as doctors to be actually trying to engage the community in issues of counter-terrorism.
Right.
We've got much more bigger issues: diabetes, obesity, smoking, it's already been mentioned about road traffic accidents. These cause far more deaths than anything to do with terrorism and the attacks that have happened post 9/11 and post 7/7.
Right.
And I think that if you ask any GP, any doctor in the NHS, and apparently from the Royal College of Physicians, they've said 44,000 healthcare professionals have been trained. That is a monumental waste of money when we could spend that money on training for actually issues that really do kill people in this country.
All right, Doctor, I'm
and
just about
sadly, it's not our job to be dealing with ideological health.
All right, Doctor, I'm just about to wrap up this conversation. Sue, very quickly, I want to give you the last word. What's the most positive conversation you've had about this actual issue with healthcare workers helping you with engaging with the community? What's the best thing you've heard so far?
Yeah, I guess I can refer to a really positive conversation today with healthcare professionals that want to get involved actually at a much earlier stage in that triage process. So actually they're part of triaging some of those referrals to make sure that then there aren't inappropriate referrals coming through the system.
And what did they say to you, Sue? Can you share some words? What do they say?
Yeah, that actually if we can identify, make sure that we give our staff the confidence to refer, but refer appropriately and proportionately.
All right.
That actually we can assist in raising awareness, but two, bringing much earlier into that cycle the preventative opportunities that are there.
All right, thank you to all of our guests for now. We're just putting a pause on the conversation. I will be taking them to the post show at stream.aljazeera.com. Let me tell you about the next AJ stream though. In the name of free speech, the Australian government wants to repeal part of the law that makes racist language illegal. But would repealing hate speech laws perhaps allow racism acts to go unpunished? Well, we will find that out in our next edition of AJ Stream. Until then, we'll see you online. Don't be late for the post show. It's starting in about 10 seconds time. Thanks for watching. Hello again, welcome back to the Streams Online Post Show. We've been talking about a new directive from counter-terrorism programme in the United Kingdom called PREVENT that's providing mandatory training to National Health Service employees so they can help identify potential terrorists and report them to authorities. Let's kick off with the community. Omar, what are you seeing there?
We're actually having a lot of concerns about how this basically makes the Muslim community feel in the UK. We have a couple of tweets here. Mayhem says this further marginalizes Muslims to make them not use the NHS and possibly die of curable things. And we have Marie here who says, as a practicing Muslim, I would be reluctant to go and see a doctor in fear of being wrongly identified as a terrorist. So, Sue, even though this program is not targeted at Muslims, there's this perception out there. Is this a PR problem that the program has, that people essentially don't understand what it's supposed to do?
And I think, we are interested in extreme right-wing risk as well. So the last big case we had here in Birmingham was Pavlo Lapshin, Ukrainian male that was attacking mosques. Now, he was a extreme right-wing ideology, and actually a number of the referrals we get through are linked to extreme right-wing ideology. So it isn't, but I guess what we're not good at and we need to get better at is sharing some of those examples, that it isn't all about identifying risk within the Muslim community. Actually, it's identifying vulnerability full stop across the piece, any individual, and then having a proportionate response that has a multi-agency facet to it that helps to reduce that vulnerability.
Imran,
I'd just like to add,
yeah, go ahead.
So, unfortunately, what's happened, and this is, not sort of blaming Sue on this, but the PREVENT strategy itself doesn't really focus on the far right. It doesn't really give enough credence to it. So groups like the EDL, the BNP, who are very far right in their extremist views.
And in Iran, we have an audience that's beyond the United Kingdom, so just explain those two groups for our international audience.
The English Defence League, which is a far right extremist group based in Britain, which is very much an Islamophobic group that is against Islam and Muslims, and the British National Party, again, a political party which holds very far right extremist views and Islamophobic views. And unfortunately, I think the strategy itself is very woolly and sloppy in some of its terminology. It's almost like double language. So at points it will ask for free speech and it says we promote it. Yet at the same time there is clearly issues about it curtailing it. And I think, some of the things that I experience, I'm doing a study at the moment looking at Muslim perceptions in Birmingham of counter-terrorism policies overall, and things like Trojan Horse, various other things that have happened in Britain.
So Imran, tell us about Trojan Horse. Just very briefly.
Well,
if you're going to name drop projects, I'm going to make you explain them. Go ahead.
Course, yes. Trojan Horse is this allegation that a number of schools have been involved in an Islamic plot, so to speak, where there's quite a sinister dossier that's been sent around saying that they're trying to change the curriculum. But in effect, that and other things have had an impact. And the Muslims I spoke to in Birmingham have told me very much they feel like a suspect community.
Is this a PR issue then?
Can I just challenge a couple of those things? I mean, first of all, the EDL are not an extreme right-wing group. They're a nationalistic group, so they don't fall into that category. And secondly, the issue around Trojan Horse is not a matter for counter-terrorism. It's a matter for communities and cohesion and education.
I agree with that. I agree with that, Sue. What I'm saying is that the police, sorry, not yourself, Michael Gove, by bringing in a counter-terrorism officer to look at the whole issue is very problematic, and I think you'd agree with me on that.
All right, we can have this conversation all day, but we don't have time for this. So let's get back on track here. So in terms of being targeted as a group, I have heard that critique, but I also want to go to the head of the PREVENT unit, and this is Sir Peter Fahey. And this is what he had to say about this, because he was very direct. He says, this isn't surveillance, we're not targeting, this is what we're doing. Have a listen to this.
If there are health professionals who have serious concerns that the person they're dealing with, is getting involved in extremist activity and that is harming their well-being and harming the community, then yes, absolutely, it's about them being able to raise those concerns.
Is PREVENT a surveillance program?
Well, I know some people think it's a surveillance program. We would say it is absolutely not. We have different surveillance programs when there are serious, concerns, when there is evidence, when there is intelligence, clearly about somebody actively involved in terrorism. Prevent is about involving the community, different institutions, different organisations, and absolutely looking out for signs that people may be being drawn into violent extremism.
So, Doctor, you are going to be a Prevent leader. You volunteered to take up that role. What does that exactly mean?
Well, I'll go for the training, and obviously what I would be doing is trying to look at as objectively as possibly to see that, as Jahan and Imran have mentioned, that are the situations and the questions that they arise, are they actually valid or are they not? And one thing I would like to say, which is quite important, because this is a bit of a deflection, my organisation, Cage, that I'm a director of, has actually been targeted quite often by Prevent, with some our events being closed down and actually being asked to shift. And I think that if people are talking about radicalisation and these type of issues, I think that Prevent needs to be quite clear that are they really trying to safeguard, or are they trying to clamp down on dissent? Because if that's the case, I'd say I'm an NHS professional, I'm looking to join the Prevent thing to see actually what it's all about and actually to ask open questions. But I would like to hear from Sue and those who might be based in London, why is it that a number of Cage events have actually been stopped because of Prevent?
And I'm going to interject there because today's program was about healthcare professionals and actually using them and engaging with them with the community. And I know you wear more than one hat, and I appreciate you have other interests and passions, but I'm going to keep us on track today, keep Sue on track as well. Let me head back here to our community.
We actually have concerns that are being raised beyond the Muslim community. We have Najib here on Facebook who says, by identifying any kind of deviation from narrowly prescribed ideological norms as a precursor to terrorism, these policies alienate and disenfranchise further the very sections of the population that they are aimed at. And we also have this video comment. Take a listen to this.
Of setting criteria to define what to look for when seeking out those who create terrorist acts, you're simply putting a criteria on something that is ambiguous, that it's always in a flux state, and that is terrorism. And these criteria can only impact already ostracized people negatively.
So, Sue, given the fact that we've seen a lot of negative backlash essentially against this program, do you have any fears at all that you could be further alienating segments of society, and therefore, in essence, this program could be backfiring and increasing the threat of extremism?
I guess for us, let's deal with that issue about, is it about surveillance, Prevent? No, actually Birmingham were the first city to put counter-terrorism officers in police uniforms, working alongside local police officers and being very honest with communities about who they were. So communities had the option to not speak to them. We've not put officers out there trying to gather information. So it is about building bridges, and actually through that contact we've learnt a lot of things. We're able now to assist families when we make arrests by putting contact officers into those family units and being able to deal with some of the concerns and questions that the families have got and have that direct link into the investigation side. We are able to influence the policies around the use of Schedule 7 as people come through airports and have that dialogue with communities.
Schedule 7, very quickly.
Yeah, it's the power to stop people coming through the border.
Very nice,
it's about border control through the airports. So actually, for me, engagement is a two-way process, and we need to hear and listen to the concerns of the community. And we are very proactive in bringing together community meetings to deal first-hand with the concerns that communities have got around some of the arrests that you talked about, that you alluded to see how that is playing out in communities. But we can't ignore that the lone actor threat is real. You saw it in Boston. We've had cases here. Nicky Riley, a young boy in Exeter, tried to blow himself up in a cafe. He suffered from Aspergillus. And so could a health professional have spotted some of the deterioration in his health that may have prevented him from harming himself? And that is the bit where health professionals can come in and assist.
Sure. See, Sue, when I said to Dr. Siddiqui, if you've got any better ideas, he said it's not my job. So let me ask the same thing to Jahan. Any better ideas? If you're not comfortable with Prevent, that's one way to engage with the community. What do you think might work better?
I think you need to have an open society where you can actually have a space to discuss everything and anything. And that's where people will come out with their feelings, their opinions, their interpretations, and they can be corrected. With the Prevent program, one of the great problems is people feeling ostracized, people feeling that they're being focused on, and all that's going to do is alienate them, and it's going to shut down the opportunity.
So Jahan, we're going over territory that you actually beautifully explained a little earlier on, so I'm going to call time on this conversation. Thank you to Jahan and Imran, to Dr. Siddiqui and Sue Southern for actually joining in this conversation, talking about Prevent, and particularly about using healthcare professionals in the UK as a way to engage with the community and maybe spot potential radicalized individuals, maybe before they even get to that place. This conversation is not over yet. We're always going online at stream.aljazeera.com, and you can watch the whole show back again if you enjoyed it that much. Omar, closing thoughts from the community.
A couple of closing disputing thoughts from the community. Grace here says the UK has the right to make sure its citizens are safe, and I salute them as I feel safe. And we have Hadim who says this program is a fruitless gesture that lowers the psychic wellness of the innocent and often already ostracized population.
Okay, to be continued. Meanwhile, what we'll be talking about on the next AJ stream. In the name of free speech, the Australian government wants to repeal part of a law that makes a racist language illegal. But would repealing hate speech laws allow racist acts to go unpunished? That is a question for our next panel of guests. They will be joining us in 24 hours' time. See you then and online. Thanks for watching.